Hello everyone, we are back at it. We're going to do another few chapters of The Hobbit. We're going to do a cosplay story time. If you guys want to see the first 5 chapters, I will be uploading those onto the Scottish Scooby Gang YouTube account. So I've read through, if you're just joining us, we have got through the Misty Mountains, we've got through the Goblin Caves, and we've got through Riddles in the Dark with Gollum. So Bilbo has obtained Sting, and he's obtained the One Ring, but he doesn't know it yet. So yes, this is cosplay story time with Bilbo Baggins. If you guys want to see more cosplay story times, I did a Scooby-Doo one for World Book Day where it was Choose Your Own Adventure. So that one's uploaded onto the YouTube. Hello! I am Bilbo. Welcome to Cosplay Story Time, where we are going to be going through The Hobbit, a few chapters at a time. So far we are just about to start chapter 6, Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire. So we've just got out of the... Just got out of Goblins. We got out of the Goblin Cave and Gollum's Cave, where Bilbo beat him in a riddles contest and obtained the One Ring while scrambling around in the dark. Okay, we'll wait until. Tell you what, we'll wait until 9 o'clock, and then we will get through a couple more chapters. How about that? So I'll just have a wee look, because when I'm reading I find it really hard to read and look at the chat at the same time, so I'll probably not be looking at the chat too much while I'm reading, so I'll take this time. I'll take the time to just read at the moment, or read the chat at the moment even. Hope everyone's doing okay. I'm still having a stressful time. As you can tell, I'm still in the hotel at the moment because my flat is uninhabitable due to a leak, which my neighbours did not sort out in time, so things are a little bit rough at the moment, but we will, hopefully at some point, I'll be back in my flat with all my cosplays, but right now I've got limited cosplays in one tiny hotel room, so things are a bit rough right now. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Yeah! Yep, pretty much. The desolation is flat. Yeah. God, yep, that's accurate right now. Place is starting to feel like Gollum's Cave. Damp and moist and puddles of water everywhere. It's miserable. Get insurance, guys. That's the lesson. I had insurance, and my insurance had to pay for their fucking leak. So get insurance. Hope everyone else is doing well. As I say, I'm having a bit of a rough time at the moment, and this is keeping me occupied during the evenings. A battle of his leaky neighbours. Honestly, it bloody has been a battle. Just trying to get through to them. Hey! Hey, G! Thank you for joining. Right, G, I believe you still have moderator rights, so I'll probably, if you are joining us for tonight's cosplay story time, you might be on chat duty, just because I'll be reading, so I won't actually have much time to actually look at the chat and things like that. So, I'm off to bed at the moment, so I won't be able to watch this whole... That's totally fine. It will be uploaded to YouTube at some point, so you'll be able to watch it back at some point. Yeah, no, it is quite late in the night. I had to summon the energy to put on the costume after work. And, you know, I actually find the energy to read a book. I will do my best with the voices, as I have done. I've really tried my best with Gollum. For some reason, my Rivendell elves were Irish. I really felt like they should have been Welsh, given the language, but they were Irish, because that was the only accent I could come up with. What is my favourite book? My favourite book of all time? I'm not a massive reader, but I'm gonna say I really do enjoy the Stephen King Four Seasons book, which is basically all the short stories. So Shawshank Redemption, The Body, Apt Pupil, and God, what's the other one in that book? I can't remember. But anyway, those ones. Shawshank Redemption is my favourite movie of all time. If we're talking favourite Tolkien book, I quite like this one. This is why I picked this one. A controversial take, but this is much better written and plot driven than the Lord of the Rings books. Like, I like the Lord of the Rings books, but they're far too dense to be accessible, I think. They don't drive the plot. They're world building books. The films do a really good job. The films are excellent because the films do a really good job of driving the plot forward and making you care. I much prefer the tone of this book, because it is, it is something you can do like this. You can treat it like a bedtime story. It's a nice adventure book. Thank you for sharing the live, guys. I really appreciate that. We'll wait a few more minutes for folk to join, and then we'll kick off with Chapter 6, Out of the Frying Pan and Into the Fire. So, if you're just joining us, we're doing Cosplay Storytime. We're going through the Hobbit. So in the last 2 live streams we did, I sort of do these kind of unannounced, whenever I fancy it. Sort of treat it like your bedtime story, but we've made it through the trolls. Bilbo's left his hobbit hole on an adventure with the dwarves. He's, being captured by trolls who got turned to stone. He's made it through the Misty Mountains. They tried to camp in a cave, got captured by goblins. Bilbo fell into a dark, dark cave and discovered not only the One Ring, but Gollum, and had to use his wits to escape that situation, because Gollum challenges him to a riddles contest. So I've just made it out of Gollum's cave and past the goblins guarding the exit. Right, let's wait a couple more minutes. Go get yourselves a cup of tea or something, or a nice hot chocolate. Cozy down, get in your pajamas, treat this like a bedtime story, you know what I mean? Like, put it on in the background. It's going to be a nice casual read. I'm going to do my best with the voices. I'll try and bring it to life as much as possible for you. I'm not the strongest reader, but I'll do my best. Lovely, right. Okie dokie. We'll wait a couple more minutes. If you've got anyone who's into the Hobbit or Tolkien or anything like that you think would enjoy this, please share the live. Which is my favourite ring? I'm going to say Gandalf's ring. What's that? Narya? Yeah, Narya, the fire ring, one of the elven rings. Gonna go with that one. I think he does some really cool stuff with it. Although there's something nice about Nenya, the one that Galadriel has, that is essentially the place of, like, it brings her forest to life, and it gives this magic and this wonder in Lothlorien. Oh, I should have seen that one coming. If you're into Lord of the Rings and drinking, then you should play Lord of the Ring of Fire, which is a Ring of Fire based drinking game. You can get absolutely sloshed on it, so be careful. Like, I don't drink anymore, so. I don't drink anymore because I used to drink a lot. It's bad that I'm already tired and we've not even started. I don't know how late I'll go tonight. I might not go as late as I did last time. But we'll see what we get to. Yeah, we might get to Bjorn's house, I think. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll try and get to Bjorn's house and maybe into Mirkwood. That's good. Well done. Well done, G. That is really hard because the shitty thing about addiction is it's got to come from the person who is in it. No one could have stopped me. No one could have made me decide to stop drinking. It had to come from me. I had to make that decision. And, you know, I've had a friend, or an ex-friend now, who just wouldn't stop and was violent and was cruel. And dude was meant to get married this weekend gone. And he completely ruined that for himself. Because he refused to get sober. So it's really sad. Hey, well done. Well done, Woody Strikes Back. Congratulations. It's a hard decision. It's a hard decision to make. I'm not one to say that everyone should get sober. I'm not for abstinence or anything like that. It's about moderation. Like if you can look yourself in the mirror and answer the question, do I have a healthy relationship with X, Y, and Z substance, and the answer is yes, then fine. But as soon as the honest answer is no, you gotta stop. But it's hard. I mean, like hell, like I can't really talk. I'm still addicted to this. I'll drink 2 liters of this a day. So we all have those demons, but well done, guys. Tell you what, Charlie, I will ask that we kind of tone down the Harry Potter references. Just if you've not been on this account before, like I used to be a massive Harry Potter fan. I used to make wands and everything, and I know you're just making jokes, and I totally get that. But I'm trying to completely step away from that franchise. Because of the whole J.K. Rowling thing. Like, this is a very, very much trans rights are human rights, Black Lives Matter type account. Like, this is very much like, and supporting J.K. Rowling at this point is just amoral. Like, it just keeping that world in public consciousness more than it has to be. Like, buying the game, supporting the game, anything like that, it's not right. So, like we do a cosplay quiz every Sunday, and we very much, basically we do a cosplay quiz every single Sunday, and we have very adamantly said there is not going to be a Harry Potter one. Not because we don't know it. I have an encyclopedic knowledge of that world. You know, I could probably kick anyone's ass at Harry Potter trivia, but it's just not worth it. It's not worth alienating the trans community. It's not worth making them feel like their identities are worth less than a fictional world full of wizards. So yeah, just I don't know, just go canny on that. Like I know you're just making jokes. Like I'm not. This is not me trying to demonize you or anything like that. It's just on this account and beyond. It's like you gotta step away. You gotta step away from that franchise. You gotta make a statement with your wallets and with your sort of like social and internet recourses. Like you just gotta be careful, because you don't know if people in your lives are trans and haven't come out because they don't think that someone's a safe person to come out to, or you don't know if it's hurting them. Like a lot of people in the trans community, the trans cosplay community, have stated that if they see people at Comic-Con, you know, cosplaying Harry Potter characters, they don't feel that those are safe people to go to. So I got rid of all my Harry Potter stuff. Like, I don't want to be part of that. Right, anyway, it is 9 o'clock, so let us begin with The Hobbit. This is chapter 6, so if you've just joined us, we've just made it through Gollum's cave in the last 2 live streams, and now we're going chapter 6, out of the frying pan and into the fire. Bilbo had escaped the goblins, but he did not know where he was. He had lost hood, cloak, food, pony, his buttons, and his friends. He wandered on and on until the sun began to sink westwards, behind the mountains. Their shadows fell across Bilbo's path, and he looked back, and then he looked forward, and could see before him only ridges and slopes falling towards lowlands and plains glimpsed occasionally between the trees. "Good heavens," he exclaimed, "I seem to have got right to the other side of the misty mountains, right to the edge of the land beyond. Where and oh, where can Gandalf and the dwarves have got to? I only hope to goodness they're not still back there in the power of the goblins." He still wandered on, out of the little high valley, over its edge, and down the slopes beyond, but all the while a very uncomfortable thought was growing inside him. He wondered whether he ought not, now he had the magic ring, to go back into the horrible, horrible tunnels and look for his friends. He had just made up his mind that it was his duty, that he must turn back, and very miserably felt about it, when he heard voices. He stopped and listened. It did not sound like goblins, so he crept forward carefully. He was on a stony path winding downwards with a rocky wall on the left hand. On the other side of the ground sloped away, and there were dells below the level of the path, overhung with bushes and low trees. In one of these dells, under the bushes, people were talking. He crept still nearer, and suddenly he saw peering between 2 big boulders a head with a red hood on. It was Balin doing lookout. He could have clapped and shouted for joy, but he did not. He had still got the ring on, for fear of meeting something unexpected and unpleasant, and he saw that Balin was looking straight at him without noticing him. "I will give them a surprise," he thought, as he crawled into the bushes at the edge of the dell. Gandalf was arguing with the dwarves. They were discussing all that had happened to them in the tunnels and wondering and debating what they were to do now. The dwarves were grumbling, and Gandalf was saying they could not possibly go on their journey, leaving Mr. Baggins in the hands of the goblins, without trying to find out if he was alive or dead, and without trying to rescue him. "After all, he is my friend," said the wizard, "and not a bad little chap. I feel responsible for him. I wish to goodness you had not lost him." The dwarves wanted to let him know why The dwarves wanted to know why he'd ever been brought at all, why he could not stick to his friends and come along with them, and why the wizard had not chosen someone with far more sense. He's been more trouble than you so far," said one. "If we have to go back now into those abominable tunnels to look for him, then drat him, I say." Gandalf answered angrily, "I brought him, and I don't bring things that are of no use. Either you help me look for him, or I go and leave you here to get out of this mess as best you can yourselves. If we can only find him again, you will thank me before all this is over. Whatever did you go and drop him for, Dory?" "You would adopt him," said Dory. "If a goblin had suddenly grabbed your legs from behind in the dark, tripped up your feet, and kicked you in the back." "Then why didn't you pick him up again?" "Good heavens, can you ask? Goblins fighting and biting in the dark, everybody falling over bodies and hitting one another. You nearly chopped off my head with Glandring, and Thorin was stabbing here and everywhere with Orcrist. All of a sudden you gave one of your blinding flashes, and we saw the goblins running back yelping. You shouted, 'Follow me, everybody!' and everybody ought to have followed. We thought everybody had. There was no time to count, as you know quite well, till we had dashed through the gate guards, out of the lower door, and helter-skelter down here. And here we are, without the burglar. Confiscate him." "And here's the burglar," said Bilbo, stepping down into the middle of them and slipping off the ring. Bless me, how they jumped! Then they shouted with surprise and delight. Gandalf was astonished as any of them, but probably more pleased than all the others. He called to Balin and told him what he thought of a lookout man who let people walk right into them like that without warning. It is a fact that Bilbo's reputation went up a very great deal with the dwarves after this. If they had still doubted that he was really a first-class burglar, in spite of Gandalf's words, they doubted no longer. Balin was the most puzzled of all, but everybody said it was a very clever bit of work. Indeed, Bilbo was so pleased with their praise that he just chuckled inside and said nothing whatsoever about the ring. And when they asked him how he did it, he just said, "Oh, just crept along, very carefully and quietly." "Well, it is the first time that even a mouse has crept along carefully and quietly under my very nose and not been spotted," said Balin, "and I take my hat off to you," which he did. "Balin, at your service," said he. "Your servant, Mr. Baggins," said Bilbo. Then they wanted to know all about his adventures after they'd lost him, and he sat down and told them everything, except about the finding of the ring. Not just now, he thought. They were particularly interested in the riddle competition, and shuddered most appreciatively at his description of Gollum. "And then I couldn't think of another question with him sitting beside me," ended Bilbo. "So I said, 'What's in my pocket?' And he couldn't guess in 3 goes. So I said, 'What about your promise? Show me the way out.' But he came at me to kill me. And I ran and fell over, and he missed me in the dark. And then I followed him because I heard him talking to himself. He thought I really knew the way out, and so he was making for it. And then he sat down in the entrance, and I could not get by. So I jumped over him and escaped, and ran down the gate." "What about the guards?" they asked. "Weren't there any?" "Oh yes, lots, but I dodged them. I got stuck in the door, which was only open a crack, and I lost my buttons," he said, sadly looking at his torn clothes. "But I squeezed through all right, and here I am." The dwarves looked to him with quite a new respect, and when he talked about dodging guards, jumping over Gollum and squeezing through, as if it was not very difficult or very alarming. "What did I tell you?" said Gandalf, laughing. "Mr. Baggins has more about him than you guess." He gave Bilbo a queer look from under his bushy eyebrows as he said this, and the Hobbit wondered if he guessed it at the part of his tale that he'd left out. Then he had questions of his own to ask, for it was Gandalf that explained it all now to the dwarves. Bilbo had not heard it. He wanted to know how the wizard had turned up again, and where they had all got to now. The wizard, to tell the truth, never minded explaining his cleverness more than once, so now he told Bilbo that both he and Elrond had been well aware of the presence of evil goblins in that part of the mountains, but their main gate used to come out on a different pass, one more easy to travel by, so they often caught people benighted near their gates. Evidently, people had given up going that way, and the goblins must have opened their new entrance at the top of the pass the dwarves had taken, quite recently, because it had been found quite safe up to now. "I must see where I can't find a more or less decent giant to block it up again," said Gandalf, "or soon there will be no getting over the mountains at all." As soon as Gandalf had heard Bilbo's yell, he realised what had happened. In the flash which killed the goblins that were grabbing him, he had nipped inside the crack, just as it snapped to. He followed after the drivers and prisoners right to the edge of the great hall, and there he sat down and worked up the best magic he could in the shadows. A very ticklish business it was. Touch and go. But of course, Gandalf had made a special study of bewitchments with fire and lights. Even the Hobbit had never forgotten the magic fireworks at Old Took's Midsummer Eve parties, as you remember. The rest we all know, except that Gandalf knew all about the back door, as the goblins called the lower gate, where Bilbo had lost his buttons. As a matter of fact, it was well known to anybody who was acquainted with this part of the mountains, but it took a wizard to keep his head in the tunnels and guide them in the right direction. They made that gate ages ago, partly for a way to escape if they needed one, partly as a way into the lands beyond, where they still come into the dark and do great damage. They guard it always, and no one has ever managed to block it up. They will guard it doubly after this. He laughed. All the others laughed too. After all, they had lost a good deal, but they had killed the great goblin, and a great many others besides, and they had all escaped, so they might be said to have had the best of it so far. But the wizard called them to their senses. "We must be getting on at once, if we are a little rested," he said. "They will be out after us hunting in hundreds when night comes, and already shadows are lengthening. They can smell our footsteps for hours and hours after we've passed. We must be miles on before dusk. There will be a bit of moon if it keeps fine, and that is lucky. Not that they mind the moon much, but it will give us a little light to steer by." "Oh, yes," he said in answer to more questions from the Hobbit. "You lose track of time inside goblin tunnels. Today is Thursday, and it was Monday night or Tuesday morning that we were captured. We have gone miles and miles and come right down through the heart of the mountains, and are on the other side. Quite a shortcut. But now we are not at the point to which our pass would have brought us. We are too far to the north and have some awkward country ahead, and we are still pretty high up. Let's get on." "I'm dreadfully hungry," groaned Bilbo, who was suddenly aware that he had not had a meal since the night before last. Just think of that for a hobbit! His stomach felt all empty and loose, and his legs all wobbly now that the excitement was over. "Can't help it," said Gandalf, "unless you like to go back and ask the goblins nicely to let you have your pony back and your luggage." "No, thank you," said Bilbo. "Very well then. We must tighten our belts and trudge on, or we shall be made into supper, and that will be much worse than having none ourselves." Gee, if you wouldn't mind doing me a favour if you're still there and just muting folk. As they went on, but Bilbo looked from side to side for something to eat, but the blackberries were still only in flower, and of course there were no nuts, not even hawthorn berries. He nibbled a bit of sorrel, and he drank from a small mountain stream that crossed the path, and he ate 3 wild strawberries that he found on its bank, but it was still not much good. They still went on and on. The rough path disappeared. The bushes and the long grasses between the boulders, the patches of rabbit-cropped turf, the thyme and the sage and the marjoram and the yellow rock roses all vanished, and they found themselves at the top of a wide, steep slope of fallen stones, the remains of a landslide. When they began to go down this, rubbish and small pebbles rolled away from their feet. Soon larger bits of split stone went clattering down and started other pieces below them, slithering and rolling. Then lumps of rock were disturbed and bounded off, crashing down with a dust and noise. Before long, the whole slope above them and below seemed on the move, and they were sliding away, huddled all together in a fearful confusion of slipping and rattling and cracking slabs and stones. It was the trees at the bottom that saved them. They slid into the edge of a climbing wood of pines that here stood up the mountain slope from the deeper, darker forests of the valleys below. Some caught hold of the trunks and swung themselves into lower branches. Some, like the little hobbit, got behind a tree for shelter on the onslaught of rocks. Soon the danger was over. The slide had stopped, and the last faint crashes could be heard as the largest of the disturbed stones went bounding and spinning amongst the bracken and pine roots far below. "Well, that has got us on a bit," said Gandalf, "and even goblins tracking us will have a job to come down here quietly." "I dare say," grumbled Bomber, "but they won't find it difficult to send stones bouncing down our heads." The dwarves and Bilbo were feeling far from happy and were rubbing their bruised and damaged legs and feet. "Nonsense! We are going to turn aside out of here before the path of the slide. We must be quick. Look at the light." The sun had long gone behind the mountains. Already the shadows were deepening about them, though far away through the trees and over the black tops of those growing lower down they could still see the evening lights on the plains beyond. They limped along now, as fast as they were able, down the gentle slopes of a pine forest in a slanting path leading steadily southwards. At times they were pushing through a sea of bracken, with tall fronds rising right above the hobbit's head. At times they were marching along quiet over a floor of pine needles, and all the while the forest gloom got heavier, and the forest silence deeper. There was no wind that evening to bring even a sea sighing into the branches of the trees. "Must we go any farther?" asked Bilbo, when it was so dark that he could really only just see Thorin's beard wagging beside him, and so quiet he could hear the dwarves breathing like a loud noise. "My toes are all bruised and bent, and my legs ache, and my stomach is wagging like an empty sack." "A bit further," said Gandalf. After what seemed ages further came suddenly to an opening where no trees grew. The moon was up and was shining into the clearing. Somehow it struck all of them as not at all a nice place, although there was nothing wrong to see. All of a sudden they heard a howl away downhill, a long, shuddering howl. It was answered by another right away to the right and a good deal nearer to them, then by another not far away to the left. It was wolves howling at the moon, wolves gathering together. There were no wolves living near Mr. Baggins's hole at home, but he knew that noise. He had had it described to him enough in tales. One of his older cousins, on the Took side, who had been a great traveller, used to imitate it to frighten him. To hear it out in the forest under the moon was too much for Bilbo. Even magic rings are not much use against wolves, especially against the evil packs that lived under the shadow of the goblin-infested mountains, over the edge of the wild on the borders of the unknown. Wolves of that sort smell keener than goblins, and do not need to see to catch you. "What shall we do? What shall we do?" he cried. "Escaping goblins, to be caught by wolves," he said. And it became a proverb, though we now say "out of the frying pan and into the fire," in the same sort of uncomfortable situations. "Up the trees, quick!" "Up the trees, quick!" cried Gandalf, and they ran up to the trees at the edge of the glade, hunting for those that had branches fairly low or slender enough to swarm up. They found them as quick as ever they could, you can guess, and up they went as high as ever they could trust the branches. You would have laughed from a safe distance if you had seen the dwarves sitting up in the trees with their beards dangling down, like old gentlemen gone cracked and playing at being boys. Philly and Killy were at the top of a tall larch, like an enormous Christmas tree. Dori, Nori, Ori, Owen and Glowin were more comfortable in a huge pine with regular branches sticking out at intervals like the spokes of a wheel. Biffer, Boffer and Bomber and Thorin were in another. Dwalin and Balin had swarmed up a tall slender fir with few branches and were still trying to find a place to sit in the greenery of the topmost boughs. Gandalf, who was a good deal taller than the others, had found a tree into which they could not climb, a large pine standing at the very edge of the glade. He was quite hidden in its boughs, but you could see his eyes gleaming in the moon as he peeped out. And Bilbo? He could not get into any tree, and was scuttling about from trunk to trunk like a rabbit that had lost its hole and has a dog after it. "You've left the burglar down there behind again," said Nori to Dori, looking down. "I can't always be carrying burglars on my back," said Dori. "Down tunnels and up trees. What do you think I am, a porter?" "He'll be eaten if we don't do something," said Thorin, for there were howls all around them now, getting nearer and nearer. "Dori!" he called, for Dori was lowest in the easiest tree. "Be quick and give Mr. Baggins a hand up." Dori was a really decent fellow in spite of his grumbling. Poor Bilbo could not reach his hand, even when he climbed down to the bottom branch and hung his arm down as low as he ever could. So Dory actually climbed out of the tree and let Bilbo scramble up and stand on his back. Just at that moment, the wolves trotted howling into the clearing. All of a sudden, there were hundreds of eyes looking at them. Still, Dory did not let Bilbo down. He waited till he had clambered off his shoulders into the branches, and then he jumped for the branches himself. Only just in time, a wolf snapped at his cloak as he swung up and nearly got him. In a minute there was a whole pack of them yelping all around the tree and leaping up the trunk, with eyes blazing and tongues hanging out. But even the wild wargs, for so the evil wolves over the edge of the wild were named, cannot climb trees. For a time, they were safe. Luckily, it was warm and not windy. Trees are not very comfortable to sit in for any long period of time, but in the cold and the wind, with wolves all around waiting for you, they can be perfectly miserable places. This glade in the ring of trees was evidently a meeting place for the wolves. More and more kept coming in. They left guards at the foot of the tree in which Dory and Bilbo were, and then went snuffling about until they'd smelt out every tree that had anyone in it. These were guarded too, while all the rest, hundreds and hundreds it seemed, went and sat in a great circle in the glade, and in the middle of the circle was a great grey wolf. He spoke to them in the dreadful language of the wargs. Gandalf understood it. Bilbo did not, but it sounded terrible to him, and it was as if their talk was about as cruel and wicked things as it was. Every now and then all the wargs in the circle would answer their grey chief all together, and their dreadful clamour almost made the hobbit fall out of his pine tree. I will tell you what Gandalf heard, though Bilbo did not understand it. The wargs and the goblins often helped one another in wicked deeds. Goblins do not usually venture very far from their mountains unless they are driven out and are looking for new homes, or are marching to war, which I am glad to say has not happened for a long while. But in those days, they sometimes used to go on raids, especially to get food or slaves to work for them. Then, they often got the wargs to help them, and shared their plunder with them. Sometimes they rode on wolves like men do on horses. Now, it seemed that a great goblin raid had been planned for that very night. The wargs had come to meet the goblins, and the goblins were late. The reason, no doubt, was the death of the great goblin, and all the excitement caused by the dwarves and Bilbo and the wizard, for whom they were probably still hunting. In spite of the dangers of this far land, bold men had of late been making their way back into it from the south, cutting down trees and building them up several places to live in amongst the more pleasant woods in the valleys and along the river shores. There were many of them, and they were brave and well armed, and even the wargs dared not attack them if there were many together, or in the bright day. But now they had planned with the goblins' help to come by night upon some of the villages nearest to the mountains. If their plan had been carried out, there would have been none left there next day. All would have been killed except the few goblins kept from the wolves and carried back as prisoners to their caves. This was dreadful talk to listen to, not only because of the brave woodmen and their wives and children, but also because of the danger which now threatened Gandalf and his friends. The wargs were very angry and puzzled at finding themselves here in their very meeting place. They thought they were friends of the woodmen, and were come to spy on them, and would take news of their plans down into the valleys. And then the goblins and the wolves would have to fight a terrible battle instead of capturing prisoners and devouring people waked suddenly from their sleep. So the wargs had no intention of going away and letting the people up the trees escape, at any rate not until morning. And long before that, they said, goblin soldiers would be coming down from the mountains. And goblins can climb trees, or cut them down. Hi guys! Now, you can understand why Gandalf, listening to their growling and yelping, began to be dreadfully afraid, wizard though he was, and to feel that they were in a very bad place, and had not yet escaped at all. All the same, he was not going to let them have it all their own way, though he could not do very much stuck up in a tall tree with wolves all around on the ground below. He gathered the huge pine cones on the branches of the tree, and then he set one alight with the bright blue fire, and threw it whizzing down among the circle of the wolves. It struck one on the back, and immediately his shaggy coat caught fire, and he was leaping to and fro, yelping horribly. Then another came, and another, one in blue flames, one in red, one in green. They burst onto the ground in the middle of the circle and went off in coloured sparks and smoke. A specially large one hit the chief wolf on the nose, and he leapt in the air 10 feet and then rushed around the circle, biting and snapping even at the other wolves in his anger and his fright. The dwarves and Bilbo shouted and cheered. The rage of the wolves was terrible to see, and the commotion they made filled all the forest. Wolves are afraid of fire at all times, but this was a most horrible and uncanny fire. If a spark got on their coats, it stuck and burned into them. Unless they rolled over quick, they were soon all in flames. Very soon, all about the glade, wolves were rolling over and over to put out the sparks on their backs, while those that were burning were running and howling and setting others alight, till their own friends chased them away, and they fled off down the slopes, crying and yammering and looking for water. "And what is this uproar in the forest tonight?" said the Lord of the Eagles. He was sitting, black in the moonlight, on the top of a lonely pinnacle of rock at the eastern edge of the mountains. "I hear wolves' voices. Are the goblins in mischief in the woods?" He swept into the air, and immediately 2 of his guards from the rocks had either leapt up to follow him. Either hand had leapt up to follow him. They circled up into the sky, looking down upon the ring of the wargs, a tiny spot far, far below. But eagles have keen eyes, and can see small things at a great distance. The Lord of the Eagles of the Misty Mountains had eyes that could look at the sun unblinking, and could see a rabbit moving on the ground a mile below, even in the moonlight. So though he could not see the people in the trees, he could make out the commotion among the wolves, and see the tiny flashes of fire, and hear the howling and yelping come up faint from far beneath him. Also, he could see the glint of the moon on goblin spears and helmets, as long lines of the wicked folk crept down the hillsides from their gate and wound into the wood. Eagles are not kindly birds. Some are cowardly and cruel. But the ancient race of the northern mountains were the greatest of all birds. They were proud and strong and noble-hearted. They did not love goblins or fear them. When they took any notice of them at all, which was seldom, for they did not eat such creatures, they swooped on them and drove them shrieking back to their caves, and stopped whatever wickedness they were doing. The goblins hated the eagles, and they feared them, but could not reach their lofty seats, nor drive them from the mountains. Tonight, the Lord of Eagles was filled with curiosity to know what was afoot, so he summoned many other eagles to him, and they flew away from the mountains, and slowly, circling ever round and round, they came down, down, down towards the ring of the wolves, and the meeting place of the goblins. Sorry, we're reading The Hobbit. The Hobbit. A very good thing, too. Dreadful things had been going on down there. The wolves that had caught fire and fled into the forest had set it alight in several places. It was high summer, and on the eastern side of the mountains there had been little rain for some time. Yellowing bracken, falling branches, deep-piled pine needles, and here and there dead trees were soon all in flames. All around the clearing of the wargs fire was leaping. But the wolf guards did not leave the trees. Maddened and angry, they were leaping and howling around the trunks, cursing the dwarves in their horrible language, with their tongues hanging out, their eyes shining as red and fierce as the flames. Then suddenly goblins came running up and yelling. They thought a battle with the woodmen was going on, but they soon learned what had really happened. Some of them actually sat down and laughed. Others waved their spears and clashed the shafts against their shields. Goblins are not afraid of fire, and they soon had a plan, which seemed to them most amusing. Some got all the wolves together in a pack. Some stacked fern and brushwood around the tree trunks. Others rushed round and stamped and beat and stamped until nearly all the flames were put out. But they did not put out the fire nearest to the trees where the dwarves were. That fire they fed with the leaves and dead branches and bracken, and soon they had a ring of smoke and flame all around the dwarves, a ring which kept from spreading outwards. But it closed slowly in till the running fire was licking the fuel piled under the trees. Smoke was in Bilbo's eyes. He could feel the heat of the flames, and through the reek he could see the goblins dancing around and around in a circle like people around a midsummer bonfire. Outside the ring of dancing warriors with spears and axes stood the wolves, at a respectful distance, watching and waiting. And he could hear the goblins beginning a horrible song. 15 birds in 5 fir trees, their feathers were fanned in a fiery breeze. But funny little birds, they had no wings. What shall we do with the funny little things? Roast them alive and stew them in a pot. Fry them, boil them, eat them hot. And then they stopped and shouted out, Fly away, little birds, fly if you can. Come down, little birds, or you will get roasted in your nests. Sing, sing, little birds, why don't you sing? Go away, little boys, shouted Gandalf in answer. It isn't bird nesting time. Also naughty little boys that play with fire get punished. He said it to make them angry, and to show them he was not frightened of them. Although, of course, he was, wizard though he was. But they took no notice, and they went on singing. Burn, burn, tree and fern, shrivel and scorch a fizzling torch to light at the night for our delight, yah-hey! Bake and toast them, fry them, roast them, till beers blaze and eyes glaze, till hair smells and skins crack, fat melts and bones black. And cinders lie beneath the sky, so dwarves shall die, and the night for our delight, yah-hey! Yah-hurry-hey! Yah-hoy! And with that yahoy, the flames were under Gandalf's tree. In a moment it spread to the others. The bark caught fire, the lower branches cracked. And then Gandalf climbed to the top of his tree. Climbed to the top of his tree. The sudden splendour flashed from his wand like lightning as he got ready to spring down from on high, right among the spears of the goblins. That would have been the end of him, though he probably would have killed just as many of them as he came hurtling down like a thunderbolt. But he never leapt. Just at that moment, the Lord of the Eagles swept down from above, seized him in his talons, and was gone. There was a howl of anger and surprise from the goblins. Loud cried the Lord of the Eagles, to whom Gandalf had now spoken. Back swept the great birds that were with him, and down they came like huge black shadows. The wolves yammered and gnashed their teeth, the goblins yelled and stamped with rage, and flung their heavy spears in the air in vain. Over them swooped the eagles. The dark rush of their beating wings smote them to the floor and drove them away. Their talons tore at goblin faces. Other birds flew to the treetops and seized the dwarves, who were scrambling up now as far as they ever dared to go. But poor little Bilbo was nearly left behind again. He just managed to catch hold of Dory's legs as Dory was borne off last of all, and up they went together, above the tumult and the burning, Bilbo swinging in the air with his arms nearly breaking. Now, far below, the goblins and the wolves were scattering far and wide into the woods. A few eagles were still circling and sweeping above the battleground. The flames above the trees sprang suddenly up above the highest branches. They went up in a crackling fire. There was a sudden flurry of sparks and smoke. Bilbo had escaped, only just in time. Soon the light of the burning was faint below, a red twinkle on the black floor, and they were high up in the sky, rising all the time in strong, sweeping circles. Bilbo never forgot that flight. Clinging on to Dory's ankles, he moaned, my arms, but Dory groaned, my poor legs, my poor legs! At the best of times, heights made Bilbo giddy. He used to turn queer if he looked over the edge of quite a little cliff, and he'd never liked ladders, let alone trees, never having had to escape from wolves before. So you can imagine how his head swam now when he looked down between his dangling toes and saw the dark lands opening wide underneath him, touched here and there with the light of the moon on a hillside or a stream in the plains. The pale peaks of the mountains were coming nearer, moonlit spikes of rock sticking out of black shadows. Summer or not, it seemed very cold. He shut his eyes and wondered if he could hold on any longer, and then he imagined what would happen if he did not. He felt sick. The flight ended only just in time for him, just before his arms gave way. He loosed Dory's ankles with a gasp and fell onto the rough platform of an eagle's eyrie. There he lay without speaking, and his thoughts were a mixture of surprise at being saved from the fire and fear lest he fell from that narrow place into the deep shadows on either side. He was feeling very queer indeed in his head, and by this time, after the dreadful adventures of the last 3 days, with next to nothing to eat, and he found himself saying aloud, "Now I know what a piece of bacon feels like when it's suddenly picked out of the pan on a fork and put back on the shelf." "No, you don't," he heard Dory answering, "because the bacon knows that it will get back in the pan sooner or later, and it is hoped that we shan't. Also, eagles aren't forks." "Oh no, not a bit like storks. Forks, I mean," said Bilbo, sitting up and looking anxiously at the eagle, who was perched close by. He wondered what other nonsense he'd been saying, and if the eagle would think it rude. You ought not to be rude to an eagle when you are only the size of a hobbit and are up in their eyrie at night. The eagle only sharpened his beak on a stone and trimmed his feathers and took no notice. Soon another eagle flew up. "The Lord of Eagles bids you welcome to bring your prisoners to the great shelf," he cried, and was off again. The other seized Dory in his claws and flew away with him into the night, leaving Bilbo all alone. He had just strength to wonder what the messenger meant by prisoners, and began to think of being torn up for supper like a rabbit when his own turn came. The eagle came back, seized him in his talons by the back of his coat, and swooped off. This time he flew only a short way. Very soon Bilbo was laid down, trembling with fear, on a wide shelf of rock on the mountainside. There was no path down to it save by flying, and no path off it except by jumping over a precipice. There he found all the others sitting with their backs to the mountain wall. The Lord of Eagles was also there, and was speaking to Gandalf. It seemed that Bilbo was not going to be eaten after all. The wizard and the eagle lord appeared to know one another slightly, and even to be on friendly terms. As a matter of fact, Gandalf, who had often been in the mountains, had once rendered a service to the eagles and healed their lord from an arrow wound. So you see, prisoners had meant prisoners rescued from the goblins only, and not captives of the eagles. As Bilbo listened to the talk of Gandalf, he realized that at last they were going to escape really and truly from the dreadful mountains. He was discussing plans with the great eagles for carrying the dwarves and himself and Bilbo far away and setting them down well on their journey across the plains below. The Lord of the Eagles would not take them anywhere near where men lived. "They would shoot up with their great bows of yew," he said, "for they would think that we were after their sheep, and at other times they would be right. No, we are glad to cheat the goblins of their sport, and glad to repay our thanks to you, but we will not risk ourselves for dwarves in the southward plains." "Very well," said Gandalf. "Take us where and far as you will. We are already deeply obliged to you, but in the meantime we are famished with hunger." "I'm nearly dead of it," said Bilbo in a weak little voice that nobody heard. "That can perhaps be mended," said the Lord of the Eagles. Later, on, you might have seen a bright fire on the shelf of rock, and the figures of the dwarves around it cooking and making a fine roasting smell. The eagles had brought up dry boughs for fuel, and they brought rabbits and hares and a small sheep. The dwarves managed all the preparations. Bilbo was too weak to help, and anyway, he was not much good at skinning rabbits or cutting up meat, being used to having it delivered by the butcher all ready to cook. Gandalf too was lying down after doing his part in setting the fire going, since Owen and Glóin had lost their tinderboxes. Dwarves have never taken to matches yet. So ended the adventures of the Misty Mountains. Soon, Bilbo's stomach was feeling full and comfortable again, and he felt as if he could sleep contently, though really he would have liked a loaf and butter better than bits of meat roasted on sticks. He slept curled up on the hard rock more soundly than he had done on his feather bed in his own little hole at home. But all night he dreamed of his own house, and wandered in his sleep into all his different rooms, looking for something he could not find, nor remember what it looked like. And now we're on chapter 7, so I'm just going to take a little sip of my drink. And then, shall we continue? But you guys seem to be enjoying it, so you want another chapter? We're on chapter 7, Queer Lodgings. Hello everyone just joining us. We're doing a read-through of The Hobbit. In cosplay, of course. I hope you're all enjoying. The next morning, Bilbo woke up with the early sun in his eyes. He jumped up to look at the time and to go and put his kettle on, and found he was not home at all. So he sat down and wished in vain for a wash and a brush. He did not get either, nor tea, nor toast, nor bacon for his breakfast, only cold mutton and rabbit. After that, he had to get ready for a fresh start. This time, he was allowed to climb onto an eagle's back and cling between its wings. The air rushed over him and he shut his eyes. The dwarves were crying farewells and promising to repay the Lord of Eagles if ever they could, as off rose 15 great birds from the mountainside. The sun was still close to the eastern edge of the things. The morning was cool, and mists were in the valleys and hollows and twined here and there about the peaks and pinnacles of the hills. Bilbo opened an eye to peep, and saw that the birds were already high up, and the world was far away, and the mountains were falling back behind them into the distance. He shut his eyes again, and held on tighter. "Don't pinch," said his eagle. "You need not be frightened like a rabbit, even if you look rather like one. It is a fair morning with little wind. What is finer than flying?" Thank you. Thank you, Ike. I appreciate that. Bilbo would have liked to say, a warm bath and a late breakfast on the lawn afterwards, but he thought it better to say nothing at all and to let go his clutch just a tiny bit. And after a good while, the eagles must have seen the point they were making for, even from their great height, for they began to go down, circling round in great spirals. They did this for a long while, and at last the hobbit opened his eyes again. The earth was much nearer, and below them were trees that looked like oaks and elms, and wide grasslands, and a river running through it all. But cropping out of the ground, right in the path of the stream, which looped itself about it, was a great rock, almost a hill of a stone, like a last outpost of the distant mountains, or a huge piece cast miles into the plain by some giant among giants. Quickly now, to the top of this rock the eagles swooped one by one and set down their passengers. "Farewell," they cried, "wherever you fare, till your eyries receive you at the journey's end." That is the polite thing to say among eagles. "And may the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks." And so they parted, and though the Lord of the Eagles became in after days the king of all birds and wore a golden crown and his 15 chieftains' golden collars made of the gold that the dwarves gave them, Bilbo never saw them again, except high and far off in the Battle of the Five Armies. But as that comes in at the end of this tale, we will say no more about that just now. There was a flat space on the top of the hill of stone and a well-worn path with many steps leading down it into the river, across which a ford of huge flat stones led to the grassland beyond the stream. There was a little cave, a wholesome one, with a pebbly floor, at the foot of the steps and near the end of the stony ford. Here the party gathered and discussed what was to be done. "I always meant to see you all safe, if possible, over the mountains," said the wizard, "and now, by good management and good luck, I have done it. Indeed, we are now a great deal further east than I ever meant to come with you, for after all this is not my adventure. I may look in on it again before it is all over, but in the meanwhile I have some other pressing business to attend to." The dwarves groaned and looked most distressed, and Bilbo wept. They began to think of Gandalf was going to come all the way and would always be there to help them out of their difficulties. "I'm not going to disappear this very instant," he said. "I can give you a day or two more. Probably I can help you out of your present plight, and I need a little help myself. We have no food, no baggage, and no ponies to ride, and you don't know where you are. Now, I can tell you that. You are still some miles north of the path which we should have been following if we had not left the mountain pass in a hurry. Very few people live in these parts, unless they've come here since I was last down this way, which is some years ago. But there is somebody that I know of who lives not far away. That somebody made the steps on the great rock. The Carrick, I believe he calls it. He does not come here often, certainly not in the daytime, and it is no good waiting for him. In fact, it would be very dangerous. We must go and find him, and if all goes well at our meeting, I think I shall be off and wish you, like the eagles, farewell wherever you fare." They begged him not to leave him again. They offered him dragon gold and silver and jewels, but he would not change his mind. We shall see, and I think I've earned already some of your dragon gold when you have got it." After that, they stopped pleading. Then they took off their clothes and bathed in the river, which was shallow and clear and stony at the ford. When they had dried in the sun, which was now strong and warm, they were refreshed, if little sore and a little hungry. Soon they crossed the ford, carrying the Hobbit, and then began to march through the long green grass and down the lines of the wide-armed oaks and the tall elms. "And why is it called the Carrick?" asked Bilbo as he went along at the wizard's side. "He called it the Carrick because Carrick is his word for it. He calls things like that Carricks, and this one is the Carrick because it's the only one near his home and he knows it well." "Who calls it? Who knows it?" "The somebody I spoke of, a very great person. Now you must be all very polite when I introduce you. I shall introduce you slowly, 2 by 2, I think, and you must be careful not to annoy him, or heaven knows what will happen. He can be appalling when he is angry, though he is kind enough if humoured. Still, I warn you, he gets angry easily." The dwarves all gathered round when they heard the wizard talking like this to Bilbo. "Is that the person you're taking to us now?" they asked. "Couldn't you find someone more easy-tempered? Hadn't you better explain it all a bit clearer?" And so on. "Yes, it certainly is. No, I could not, and I was explaining it very carefully," answered the wizard crossly. "If you must know more, his name is Beorn. He is very strong, and he is a skin changer." "What? A furrier, a man that calls rabbits conies when he doesn't turn their skins into squirrels?" asked Bilbo. Good gracious heavens, no, 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 said Gandalf. Don't be a fool, Mr. Baggins, if you can help it. And in the name of all wonder, don't mention the word furrier as long as you are within 100 miles of his house. No rug, cape, tippet, muff, nor any other such misfortunate word. He is a skin changer. He changes his skin. Sometimes he is a huge black bear. Sometimes he is a great, strong, black-haired man with huge arms and a great beard. I cannot tell you much more, though that ought to be enough. Some say he is a bear descended from the great and ancient bears of the mountains that lived there before the giants came. Others say that he's a man descended from the first men who lived here before Smaug or the other dragons came into this part of the world, and before the goblins came into the hills out of the north. I cannot say, though I fancy the last is the true tale. He is not the sort of person to ask questions of. At any rate, he is under no enchantment but his own. He lives in an oak wood and has a great wooden house. And as a man, he keeps cattle and horses which are nearly as marvellous as himself. They work for him and talk to him. He does not eat them, neither does he hunt or eat wild animals. He keeps hives and hives of great fierce bees and lives most on cream and honey. As a bear, he ranges far and wide. I once saw him sitting all alone at the top of the Carrack at night, watching the moon sinking towards the misty mountains, and I heard him growl in the tongue of bears, "The day will come when they will perish, and I will go back." That is why I believe he once came from the mountains himself. Bilbo and the dwarves had now plenty to think about, and they asked no more questions. They still had a long way to walk before them. Up slope and down dale they plodded. It grew very hot. Sometimes they rested under the trees, and then Bilbo felt so hungry that he would have eaten acorns if any had been ripe enough yet to fall to the ground. It was the middle of the afternoon before they noticed that great patches of flowers had begun to spring up, all the same kinds growing together as if they had been planted. Especially there was clover, waving patches of coxcomb clover, and purple clover, and wide stretches of short, white, sweet, honey-smelling clover. There was a buzzing and a whirring and a droning in the air. Bees were busy everywhere. And such bees! Bilbo had never seen anything like them. If one was to sting me, he thought, I should swell up as big again as I am now. They were bigger than hornets. The drones were bigger than your thumb, a good deal, and the bands of yellow on their deep black bodies shone like fiery gold. "We're getting near," said Gandalf. "We're on the edge of his bee pastures." After a while, they came to a belt of tall and very ancient oaks, and beyond these to a high thorn hedge, through which you could neither see nor scramble. "You had better wait here," said the wizard to the dwarves, "and when I call or whistle, begin to come after me. You will see the way I go, but only in pairs, mind. About 5 minutes between each pair of you. Bomber is fattest and will do for two. He had better come alone and last. Come on, Mr. Baggins. There is a gate somewhere round this way." They keep fat-shaming Bomber. It's kind of mean. And with that he went off along the hedge, taking the frightened hobbit with him. They soon came to a wooden gate, high and broad, beyond which they could see gardens and a cluster of low wooden buildings, some thatched and made of unshaped logs, barns, stables, sheds, and a low, long wooden house. Inside, on the southward side of the great hedge, were rows and rows of hives with bell-shaped tops made of straw. The noise out of the giant bees flying to and fro and crawling in and out filled all the air. The wizard and the hobbit pushed open the heavy creaking gate and went down a wide track towards the house. Some horses, very sleek and well groomed, trotted up across the grass and looked at them intently with very intelligent faces, and off they galloped to the buildings. "They've gone to tell him of the arrival of strangers," said Gandalf. Soon they reached a courtyard, 3 walls of which were formed by the wooden house and its 2 long wings. In the middle there was lying a great oak trunk with many lopped branches beside it. Standing near was a huge man with a thick black beard and hair, and great bare arms and legs with knotted muscles. He was clothed in a tunic of wool down to his knees, and was leaning on a large axe. The horses were standing by him with their noses at his shoulder. "Ugh, here they are," he said to the horses, "and they don't look dangerous. You can be off." He laughed a great rolling laugh, and put down his axe and came forward. "Who are you, and what do you want?" he asked gruffly, standing in front of them and towering tall above Gandalf. As for Bilbo, he could easily have trotted through his legs without ducking his head to miss the fringe of the man's brown tunic. "I am Gandalf," said the wizard. "Never heard of him," growled the man. "And what's this little fellow?" he said. Sorry, that voice has really hurt my throat. I have to change the voice. He said, stooping down to frown at the hobbit with his bushy black eyebrows. "That is Mr. Baggins, a hobbit of good family and unimpeachable reputation," said Gandalf. Bilbo bowed. He had no hat to take off, and was painfully conscious of his many missing buttons. "I am a wizard," continued Gandalf. "I have heard of you, if you have not heard of me, but perhaps you have heard of my good cousin Radagast, who lives near the southern borders of Mirkwood." "Yes, not a bad fellow as wizards go, I believe. I used to see him now and again. Well, now I know who you are, or who you say you are. What do you want?" "To tell you the truth, we have lost our luggage and nearly lost our way, and are rather in need of help, or at least advice. I may say we have had a rather bad time with goblins in the mountains." "Goblins?" said the big man less gruffly. "Oh, so you've been having trouble with them, have you? What did you go near them for?" "We did not mean to. They surprised us at night in a pass which we had to cross, which we were coming out of the lands over west in these countries. It is a long tale." "Then you better come inside and tell me some of it, if it won't take all day," said the man, leading the way through a dark door that opened out of the courtyard into the house. Following him, they made themselves in a wide hall with a fireplace in the middle. Though it was summer, there was a wood fire burning, and the smoke was rising to the blackened rafters in search of the way out through an opening in the roof. They passed through this dim hall, lit only by the fire and the hole above it, and came through another smaller door into a sort of veranda propped on wooden posts made of single tree trunks. It faced south and was still warm and filled with the light of the westering sun, which slanted into it and fell golden on the garden full of flowers that came right up to the steps. Here they sat on wooden benches while Gandalf began his tale, and Bilbo swung his dangling legs, looked at the flowers in the garden, wondering what their names could be, as he'd never seen half of them before. "I was coming over the mountains with a friend or two," said the wizard. "Or two? I can only see one, and a little one at that," said Beorn. "Well, to tell you the truth, I did not like to bother you with the lot of us until I found out if you were busy. I will give a call, if I may." "Go on, call away." So Gandalf gave a long, shrill whistle, and presently Thorin and Dori came around the house by the garden path and stood bowing low before them. "1 or 3, you meant, I see. But these aren't hobbits, these are dwarves." "Hiya!" "Thorin Oakenshield at your service." "Dori at your service," and the two dwarves bowing again. "I don't need your service, thank you," said Beorn, "but I expect you need mine. I am not over fond of dwarves, but if it is true that you are Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, I believe, and that your companion is respectable, and that you are enemies of the goblins, and are not up to any mischief in my lands. What are you up to, by the way? They're on their way to visit the land of their fathers, away east beyond Mirkwood, put Gandalf, and it is entirely an accident that we are in your lands at all. We were crossing by the high pass that should have brought us out on the road that lies to the south of your country when we were attacked by evil goblins, as I was about to tell you. Go on telling then, said Beorn, who was never very polite. There was a terrible storm. The stone giants were hurling rocks, and at the end of the pass we took refuge in a cave, and the Hobbit and I, and several of our companions. Do you call two several? Well, no, as a matter of fact, there were more than two. Were they killed? Eaten? Gone home? Well, no, they don't seem all to have come when I whistled. Shy, I expect. You see, we are very much afraid that we are rather a lot for you to entertain. Go on, whistle again. I'm in for a party, it seems, and one or two won't make much difference, growled Beorn. Gandalf whistled again, but Nori and Ori were almost there before he'd stopped, for, if you remember, Gandalf had told them to come in pairs every 5 minutes. Hello, said Beorn. You came pretty quick. Where were you hiding? Come on, my jack-in-the-boxes. Nori, at your service. Ori, at... They began, but Beorn interrupted them. Thank you. And when I want your help, I will ask for it. Sit down, and let's get on with this tale, or it will be supper time before it's ended. As soon as we were asleep, went on Gandalf, a crack at the back of the cave opened. Goblins came and grabbed the Hobbit and dwarves and our troop of ponies. Troop of ponies? What were you, a travelling circus? Or you carrying lots of goods? Do you always call 6 a troop? Oh, no. As a matter of fact, there were more than 6 ponies, for there are more than 6 of us. And well, here are 2 more. Just at that moment, Balin and Dwalin appeared, and bowed so low that their beards swept the stone floor. The big man was frowning at first, but they did their best to be frightfully polite, and kept on nodding and bending and bowing and waving their hoods before their knees in proper dwarven fashion. Still, he stopped frowning and burst into a chuckling laugh. It looked so comical. Troop was right, he said. A fine comic one. Come in, my merry men. And what are your names? I don't want your service just now, only your names, and then sit down and stop wagging. Balin and Dwalin, they said, not daring to be offended, and sat flop on the floor looking rather surprised. Now go on again, said Beorn to the wizard. Where was I? Oh yes, I was not grabbed. I killed a goblin or 2 with a flash. Good, growled Beorn. It is some good being a wizard then. And slipped inside the crack before it closed. I followed down into the main hall, which was crowded with goblins. The great goblin was there with 30 or more armed guards. I thought to myself, even if they were not all trained together, what can a dozen do against so many? A dozen! That's the first time I've heard 8 called a dozen. Or have you still got some more jacks that haven't come out of their boxes? Well, yes, there seem to have been a couple more here now. Filly and Killy, I believe, said Gandalf, as these 2 now appeared and stood smiling and bowing. That's enough, said Beorn. Sit down and be quiet. Now go on, Gandalf. So Gandalf went on with the tale until he came to the fight in the dark and the discovery of the lower gate, and to their horror when they found that Mr. Baggins had been mislaid. We counted ourselves and found that there was no Hobbit. There were only 14 of us left. 14! That's the first time I've heard 1 from 10 leave 14. You mean 9, or else you haven't told me all their names of their party. Well, of course, you haven't seen Owen and Glowin yet, and bless me, here they are. I hope you will forgive them for bothering you. Oh, let them all come. Hurry up, come along, you 2, and sit down. But look here, Gandalf, even now you've now got yourself and 10 dwarves and the Hobbit that was lost. That only makes 11, plus 1 mislaid, and not 14, unless wizards count differently to other people. Now please get on with the tale. Bjorn did not show it more than he could help, but really he'd begun to get quite interested. You see, in the old days, he had known the very part of the mountains that Gandalf was describing. He nodded and he growled when he heard of the Hobbit's reappearance and the scramble down the stone slide of the wolf ring in the woods. That's really hard to say. When Gandalf came to their climbing into trees and with the wolves all underneath, he got up and strode about and muttered, "I wish I'd been there. I would have given them more than fireworks." "Well, yes," said Gandalf, very glad to see that his tale was making a good impression. "I did the best I could. There we were with the wolves going mad underneath us and the forest beginning to blaze in places when the goblins came down from the hills and discovered us. They yelled with the delight and sang songs making fun of us. 15 birds and 15 fir trees." "Good heavens," growled Bjorn. "Don't pretend the goblins can't count. They can. 12 isn't 15 and they know it." "And so do I. There were Bifur and Bofur as well. I haven't ventured to introduce them before, but here they are." In came Bifur and Bofur. "And me," gasped Bombur, puffing up behind. He was fat and also angry at being left till last. He refused to wait 5 minutes and followed immediately after the other two. "Well, now there are 15 of you. Since the goblins can count, I suppose that is all there were up the trees. Now perhaps we can finish this story without any more interruptions." Mr. Baggins saw then how clever Gandalf had been. The interruptions had really made Bjorn more interested in the story, and the story had kept him from sending the dwarves off at once like suspicious beggars. He never invited people into his house if he could help it. He had very few friends, and they lived a good way away. He never invited more than a couple of these to his house at a time, and now he had 15 strangers sitting in his porch. By the time the wizard had finished his tale and told of the eagle's rescue and how they'd all been brought back to the Carrick, the sun had fallen behind the peaks of the Misty Mountains, and the shadows were long in Bjorn's garden. "A very good tale," said he. "The best I've heard in a long while. If all beggars could tell such a good one, they might find me kinder. You may be making it all up, of course, but you deserve a supper for the story all the same. Let's have something to eat." "Yes, please," they all said together. "Thank you very much." Inside the hall, it was now quiet and dark. Bjorn clapped his hands, and in trotted 4 beautiful white ponies and several large, long-bodied grey dogs. Bjorn said something to them in a queer language like animal noises turned into talk. They went out again and soon came back carrying torches in their mouths, which they lit at the fire and stuck in low brackets on the pillars of the hall about the central hearth. The dogs could stand on their hind legs when they wished and carry things with their forefeet. Quickly they got out boards and trestles from the side walls and set them up near the fire. Then "maa" was heard, and in came some snow-white sheep led by a large coal-black ram. One bore a white cloth embroidered at the edges with figures of animals. Others bore on their broad backs trays with bowls and platters and knives and wooden spoons, which the dogs took and quickly laid on their trestle tables. They were very low even for Bilbo to sit at comfortably. Beside them a pony pushed 2 long-seated benches with wide rush bottoms and little short thick legs for Gandalf and Thorin, while at the far end he put Bjorn's big black chair of the same sort, in which he sat with his great legs stuck far out under the table. These were all the chairs he had in his hall, and he probably had them low like the tables for the convenience of the wonderful animals that waited on him. What did the rest sit on? They were not forgotten. The other ponies came in rolling around drum-shaped sections of logs, smoothed and polished, and low even enough for Bilbo. So soon they were all seated at Beorn's table, and the hall had not seen such a gathering for many a year. There they had a supper, or a dinner, such as they had not had since they left the last homely house in the west and said goodbye to Elrond. The light of the torches in the fire flickered about them, and on the table were 2 red beeswax candles. All the time they ate, Beorn in his deep rolling voice told tales of the wild lands on the side of the mountains, and especially of the dark and dangerous wood that lay outstretched far to north and south a day's ride before them, barring their way to the east, the terrible forest of Mirkwood. The dwarves listened and shook their beards, for they knew that they must soon venture into that forest, and after the mountains it was the worst of the perils they had to pass before they came to the dragon's stronghold. When dinner was over, they began to tell tales of their own, but Beorn seemed to be growing drowsy and paid little heed to them. They spoke most of gold and silver and jewels and the making of things by smithcraft, and Beorn did not appear to care for such things. There were no things of gold or silver in his hall, and few save the knives were made of metal at all. They sat down at the long table with their wooden drinking bowls filled with mead. The dark night came on outside. The fires in the middle of the hall were built with fresh logs, and the torches were put out, and still they sat in the light of the dancing flames, with the pillars of the house standing tall behind them, and dark at the top like trees of the forest. Whether it was magic or not, it seemed to Bilbo that he heard a sound like wind in the branches stirring in the rafters, and the hoot of owls. Soon he began to nod with sleep, and voices seemed to grow far away, until he woke with a start. The great door had creaked and slammed. Beorn was gone. The dwarves were sitting cross-legged on the floor around the fire, and presently they began to sing. Some of the verses were like this, but there were many more, and their singing went on for a good long while. The wind was on the withered heath, but in the forest stirred no leaf. The shadows lay by night and day, and dark things silent crept beneath. The wind came down from mountains cold, and like a tide it roared and rolled. Branches groaned, the forest moaned, and the light leaves were laid upon the mould. I don't know how the song goes, so I'm just making it up as I go along. Bilbo began to nod again. Suddenly, up stood Gandalf. "It is time for us to sleep," he said. "For us, but not, I think, for Beorn. In this hall we can rest sound and safe, but I warn you all not to forget what Beorn said before he left us. You must not stray outside until the sun is up, on your peril." Bilbo found that beds had already been laid out in the side of the hall, on a sort of raised platform between the pillars and the outer wall. For him there was a little mattress of straw and woolen blankets. He snuggled into them very gladly. Summertime though it was, the fire burned low, and he fell asleep. Yet in the night he awoke. The fire had now sunk to a few embers, and the dwarves and Gandalf were all asleep. To judge by their breathing, a splash of white on the floor came from the high moon, which was peering down through the smoke hole in the roof. There was a growling sound outside, and a noise of some great animal scuffling at the door. Bilbo wondered what it was, and whether it could be Beorn in enchanted shape, and if he would come in as bear and kill them. He dived under the blankets and hid his head, and fell asleep again at last, in spite of his fears. It was full morning when he woke. One of the dwarves had fallen over him in the shadows where he lay, and had rolled down with a bump from the platform onto the floor. It was Beaufort, and he was grumbling about it when Bilbo opened his eyes. "Get up, lazy bones," he said. "If there will be no more breakfast left for you." Up jumped Bilbo. "Breakfast!" he cried. "Where is breakfast?" "Mostly inside us," answered the other dwarves, who were moving about the hall. "But what is left out on the veranda. We've been about looking for Beorn ever since the sun got up, but there's no sight of him anywhere. though we found breakfast laid soon as we went out." "Where is Gandalf?" asked Bilbo, moving off to find something to eat as quick as he could. "Oh, out and about somewhere," they told him, but he saw no sign of the wizard all that day until the evening. Just before sunset, he walked into the hall, where the Hobbit and the dwarves were having supper, waited on by Beorn's wonderful animals, as they had been all day. Of Beorn they had seen and heard nothing since the night before, and they were getting puzzled. "Where is our host? And where have you been all day yourself?" they all cried. "One question at a time, and none till after supper. I haven't had a bite since breakfast." At last Gandalf pushed away his plate and jug. He had eaten 2 whole loaves with masses of butter and honey and clotted cream, and drunk at least a quart of mead, and he took out his pipe. "I will answer the second question first," he said. "But bless me, this is a splendid place for smoke rings." Indeed, for a long time they could get nothing more out of him. He was so busy sending smoke rings, dodging about the pillars of the hall, changing them into all sorts of different shapes and colours, and setting them at last chasing one another out of the hole in the roof. They must have looked very queer from outside, popping out into the air one after another. Green, blue, red, silvery grey, yellow, white, big ones, little ones dodging through big ones and joining into figure of eights and going off like a flock of birds into the distance. "I have been picking out bear tracks," he said at last. There must have been a regular bears meeting outside here last night. I saw that Beorn could not have made them all. There were too many for them, and they were of various sizes too. I should say there were little bears, large bears, ordinary bears, and gigantic bears, all dancing outside from dark to nearly dawn. They came from almost every direction, except from the west over the river from the mountains. In that direction, only one set of footprints led. None coming, only ones going away from here. I followed these as far as the Carrick. There they disappeared into the river, but the river was too deep and strong beyond the rock from each cross. It is easy enough, as you remember, to get from this bank to the Carrick by the ford, but on the other side is a cliff standing up from a swirling channel. I had to walk miles before I found a place where the river was wide and shallow enough for me to wade and swim, then miles back to pick up the tracks again. By that time, it was too late for me to follow them far. They went straight off in the direction of the pine woods on the east side of the Misty Mountains, where we had our pleasant little party with the wargs the night before last. And now, I think I have answered your question too. Your first question too," ended Gandalf, and he sat a long while silent. Bilbo thought he knew what the wizard meant. "What shall we do?" he cried. If he leads all the wargs and the goblins down here, we shall all be caught and killed. I thought you said he wasn't a friend of theirs." "So did I. And don't be silly. You had better go to your bed. Your wits are sleepy." The hobbit felt quite crushed, and as there seemed nothing else to do, he did go back to bed, and while the dwarves were still singing songs, he dropped to sleep, and still puzzling his little head about Beorn, till he dreamed a dream of hundreds of black bears dancing slow, heavy dances round and round in the moonlight in the courtyard. And then he woke up when everyone else was asleep, and he heard the same scraping, scuffling, snuffling, and growling as before. Next morning, they were all wakened by Beorn himself. "So here you are still," he said. He picked up the hobbit and laughed. "Not eaten up by the wargs or goblins or wicked bears yet, I see." And he poked Mr. Baggins' waistcoat most disrespectfully. "The little bunny is getting nice and fat again on bread and honey," he chuckled. "Come and have some more." So they all went to breakfast with him. Beorn was most jolly for a change. Indeed, he seemed to be in splendidly good humour, and set them all laughing with his funny stories. Nor did they have to wonder long where he'd been, or why he was so nice to them, for he told them himself. He had been over the river, and right back up into the mountains, from which you can guess that he could travel quickly, in bear's shape at any rate. From the burnt wolf glade, he had soon found out that that part of the story was true, but he had found out more than that. He caught a warg and a goblin wandering into the woods. From there, he had got news. The goblin patrols were still hunting with the wargs for the dwarves, and they were fiercely angry because of the death of the great goblin, and also because of the burning of the chief wolf's nose, and the death from the wizard's fire of many of their chief servants. So much they told him when he forced them, but he guessed there was more wickedness than this afoot, and that a great raid of the whole goblin army with their wolf allies into the land shadowed by the mountains might soon be made to find the dwarves, or to take vengeance on the men and creatures that lived there, and who they thought might be sheltering them. "It was a good story, that of yours," said Bjorn, "but I like it better now that I'm sure it's true. You must forgive me for not taking you at your word. If you lived near the edge of Mirkwood, you would take the word of no one that you did not know as well as your brother or better. As it is, I can only say that I'd hurried home as fast as I could to see that you were safe, and to offer you any help that I can. I shall think more kindly of dwarves after this. Killed the great goblin? Killed the great goblin!" He chuckled fiercely to himself. "What did you do with the goblin and the warg?" asked Bilbo suddenly. "Come and see," said Bjorn, and they followed round the house. A goblin's head was stuck outside the gate, and a warg skin was nailed to a tree just beyond. Bjorn was a fierce enemy, but now he was their friend, and Gandalf thought it wise to tell him their whole story and the reason for their journey, so that they could get the most help he could offer. This is what he promised to do for them. He would provide ponies for each of them, and a horse for Gandalf for their journey to the forest, and he would lay them with food to last them for weeks with care, and packed so as to be easy as possible to carry, nuts and flour and sealed jars of dried fruits and red earthenware and pots of honey, and twice-baked cakes that would keep good for a long time, and on a little of which they could march far. The making of these was one of his secrets, but honey was in them, as in most of his foods, and they were good to eat, though they did make one thirsty. Water, he said, they would not need to carry this side of the forest, for there were streams and springs along the road. "But your way through Mirkwood is dark, dangerous, and difficult," he said. "Water is not easy to find there, nor food. The time is not yet come for nuts, though it may be past and gone indeed before you get to the other side. Nuts are about all that grows there fit for food, and in there the wild things are dark and queer and savage. I will provide you with the skins for carrying water, but I will give you some bows and arrows. But I doubt very much whether you will find anything in Mirkwood will be wholesome to eat or to drink. There is one stream there, I know, black and strong, which crosses the path, that you should neither drink of nor bathe in, for I have heard that it carries an enchantment and a great drowsiness and forgetfulness, and in the dim shadows of that place I don't think you will shoot anything, wholesome or unwholesome, without straying from the path. That you must not do for any reason. That is all the advice I can give you. Beyond the edge of the forest I could not help you much. You must depend on your luck and your courage and the food I send you with you. At the gate of the forest I must ask you to send back my horse and my ponies, but I wish you all speed, and my house is open to you if ever you come back this way again." They thanked him, of course, with many bows and sweepings of their hoods, and with many and "At your service, O master of the wide wooden halls." But their spirits sank at his grave words, and they all felt that the adventure was far more dangerous than they had thought, while all the time, even if they passed all the perils of the road, the dragon was waiting for them at the end. All that morning they were busy with preparations. Soon after midday they ate with Bjorn for the last time, and after the meal they mounted the steeds he was lending them, and bidding him many farewells, they rode off through his gate at a good pace. As soon as they'd left his high hedges at the east of his fenced lands, they turned north, and then bore to the northwest. By his advice, they were no longer making for the main forest road to the south of his land. Had they followed the pass, their path would have led them down a stream from the mountains that join the great river miles south of the Carrick. At that point, there was a deep ford that they might have passed if they had still had their ponies, and beyond that a track led to the skirts of the wood and to the entrance of the old forest road. But Bjorn had warned them that that way was now often used by goblins, while the forest road itself, he had heard, was overgrown and disused at the eastern end and led to impassable marshes where the paths had long been lost. Its eastern opening had also always been far to the south of the Lonely Mountain, which would have left them still with a long and difficult northward march when they got to the other side. North of the Carrick, the edge of Mirkwood drew closer to the borders of the great river, and though the mountains drew down nearer, Bjorn advised to take this way, for at a place a few days' ride due north of the Carrick was the gate of a little-known pathway through Mirkwood that led almost straight towards the Lonely Mountain. "The goblins," Bjorn had said, "will not dare to cross the great river for 100 miles north of the Carrick, nor come near my house. It is well protected at night, but I should ride fast, for if they make their raid soon, they will cross the river to the south and scour all the edge of the forest so as to cut you off, and wargs run swifter than ponies. Still, you're safer going north, even you seem to be going back nearer to the strongholds, for that is what they will least expect, and they will have the longer ride to catch you. Be off now as quick as you may." That is where they were now riding in silence, galloping wherever the ground was grassy and smooth, with the mountains dark on their left, and in the distance the line of the river with its trees drawing ever closer. The sun had only just turned west when they started, and till evening it lay golden on the land about them. It was difficult to think of pursuing goblins behind, and when they had put many miles between them and Bjorn's house, they began to talk and to sing again, and to forget the dark forest path that lay in front. But in the evening, when the dusk came on to the peaks of the mountains, glowered against the sunset, they made a camp and set a guard, and most of them slept uneasily with dreams in which there came the howl of hunting wolves and the cries of goblins. Still, the next morning dawned bright and fair again, and there was an autumn-like mist white upon the ground, and the air was chill. But soon the sun rose red in the east, and the mists vanished, and while the shadows were still long, they were off again. So they rode now for 2 more days, and all the while they saw nothing save grass and flowers and birds and scattered trees, and occasionally small herds of red deer browsing or sitting at noon in the shade. Sometimes Bilbo saw the horns of the hart sticking out on the long grass, and at first he thought they were the dead branches of trees. That third evening they were so eager to press on, for Bjorn had said that they should reach the forest gate early on the 4th day, that they rode still forward after dusk and into the night beneath the moon. As the light faded, Bilbo thought he saw away to the right or to the left the shadowy form of a great bear prowling along in the same direction. But if he dared to mention it to Gandalf, the wizard only said, "Hush! Take no notice." Next day, they started before dawn, though their night had been short. As soon as it was light, they could see the forest coming, as if it were there to meet them, or waiting for them, like a black and frowning wall before them. The land began to slope up, and it seemed to the Hobbit that a silence began to draw in upon them. Birds began to sing less. There were no more deer. Not even rabbits were to be seen. By the afternoon, they had reached the eaves of Mirkwood, and were resting almost beneath the great overhanging boughs of its outer trees. Their trunks were huge and gnarled, their branches twisted, their leaves were dark and long. Ivy grew on them and trailed along the ground. "Well, here is Mirkwood," said Gandalf, "the greatest place of the forests of the northern world. I hope you like the look of it. Now you must send back these excellent ponies you have borrowed." The dwarves were inclined to grumble at this, but the wizard told them they were fools. Bjorn is not as far off as you seem to think, and you'd better keep your promises anyway, for he is a bad enemy. Mr. Baggins' eyes are sharper than yours. If you've not seen each night after dark a great bear going along with us, or sitting far off in the moon watching our camps, not only to guard you and guide you, but to keep an eye on the ponies too. Bjorn may be your friend, but he loves his animals as his children. Letting dwarves ride them so far and so fast, know what would happen to you if you tried to take them into the forest. You do not guess what kindness he has shown you in letting dwarves ride them so far and so fast, nor what would happen to you if you tried to take them into the forest. "What about that horse, then?" said Thorin. You don't mention sending that back." "I don't, because I am not sending it." "What about your promise, then?" "I will look after it. I am not sending the horse back. I am riding it." Then they knew that Gandalf was going to leave them at the very edge of Mirkwood, and they were in despair, but nothing they could say would change his mind. "Now, we had all this out before, when we landed out at the Carrack," he said. "It is no use arguing. I have, as I told you, some pressing business away south, and I am already late without bothering with you people. We may meet again before it is all over, and then again, of course, we may not. That depends on your luck and on your courage and sense, and I am sending Mr. Baggins with you. I have told you before, he has more about him than you guess, so you will find that out before long. So cheer up, Bilbo, and don't look so glum. Cheer up, Thorin and company. This is your expedition after all. Think of the treasure at the end, and forget the forest and the dragon, at any rate, until tomorrow morning." When tomorrow morning came, he still said the same. So now there was nothing left to do but to fill their water skins at a clear spring they found close to the forest gate and unpack the ponies. They distributed the packages as fairly as they could, though Bilbo thought his lot was wearisomely heavy, and did not at all like the idea of trudging for miles and miles with all that on his back. "Don't you worry," said Thorin. It will get lighter all too soon. Before long I expect we shall all wish our packs heavier when the foods begin to run short." Then at last they said goodbye to their ponies and turned their heads for home. Off they trotted gaily, seeming very glad to put their tails towards the shadow of Mirkwood. As they went away, Bilbo could have sworn that a thing like a bear left the shadow of the trees and shambled off quickly after them. Now Gandalf too said farewell. Bilbo sat on the ground, feeling very unhappy and wishing he was beside the wizard on his tall horse. He had gone just inside the forest after breakfast, a very poor one, and it had seemed as dark in there as morning as it did at night, and very secret. A sort of watching and waiting feeling, he said to himself. "Goodbye," said Gandalf to Thorin. "And goodbye to you all, goodbye. Straight through the forest is your way now, don't stray off the track. If you do, it is 1,000 to 1 you will ever find it again, and never get out of Mirkwood, and then I don't suppose I or anyone else will ever see you again." "Do we really have to go through?" groaned the Hobbit. "Yes, you do," said the wizard, "if you want to get to the other side. You must either go through or give up your quest. And I am not going to allow you to back out now, Mr. Baggins. I am ashamed of you for thinking of it. You have got to look after all these dwarves for me," he laughed. No, said Bilbo, "I didn't mean that. I mean, is there no way round?" There is, if you care to go 200 miles or so out of your way north and twice that south. But you wouldn't get a safe path even then. There are no safe paths in this part of the world. Remember, you are over the edge of the wild now, and in for all sorts of fun wherever you go. Before you could get round Mirkwood in the north, you'd be right among the slopes of the Grey Mountains, and they are simply stiff with goblins, hobgoblins, and orcs of the worst description. Before you could get round it in the south, you'll get into the land of the necromancer, and even you, Bilbo, don't need me to tell you tales of that black sorcerer. I don't advise you go anywhere near the places overlooked by his dark tower. Stick to the forest track, keep your spirits up, hope for the best, and with a tremendous slice of luck, you may come out one day and see the long marshes lying below you, and beyond them, high in the east, the lonely mountain, where dear old Smaug lives, though I hope he is not expecting you. Very comforting you are, to be sure, growled Thorin. Goodbye. If you won't come with us, you'd better get off without any more talk. Goodbye then, and really goodbye, said Gandalf, and he turned his horse and rode out into the west. But he could still not resist the temptation to have the last word. Before he'd passed quite out of hearing, he turned and put his hands to his mouth and called to them. They heard his voice come faintly. Goodbye, be good, take care of yourselves, and don't leave the path. Then he galloped away and was soon lost to sight. Oh, goodbye, go away, grunted the dwarves, and all the more angry because they were really filled with dismay at losing him. Now, beyond the most dangerous part of all the journey, they each shouldered the heavy pack and the water skin which was their share, and turned from the light that lay on the lands outside, and plunged into the forest. Yes, it is a very long book, and we're going to leave it there as they're entering Mirkwood for tonight. So, I hope you're enjoying it. We're getting there, but 2/3 of the way there. Yeah, pretty much every other night at the moment, roughly. It's not really a scheduled thing. I just do it whenever I can, have the energy. I think the next one probably will be Friday, about 9 p.m. So tune in. Yeah, let's say Friday, 9 p.m. Tune in, and we'll get through more. We'll get through Mirkwood together. So I hope you guys enjoyed Cosplay Storytime. If you want to see the last few chapters, the beginning of the book, check out YouTube. Those will be uploaded. We also have all our live streams uploaded to YouTube that we've done. We will be doing some original content. We also have the MCU Ranked series, where I rank the entirety of the MCU in cosplay. So that is going to be Scottish Scooby Gang for YouTube. But yes, if you enjoyed Cosplay Storytime, let me know, and we can certainly do other books in different costumes. Just a reminder, we do also do a cosplay quiz every single Sunday, 7 p.m. on live stream. So join us on Sundays. This week is BoJack Horseman themed, so that will be the theme. Yeah, no, I'm glad you guys are enjoying these. Yeah, you guys make it worth coming on and reading a bit. That Bjorn voice, though, would knacker my throat. But yeah, I wanted to at least get to Mirkwood tonight. Oh, thank you for the follow. I really appreciate that, guys. Yes, please do support us on Ko-fi if you can. ko-fi/Scottish Scooby Gang if you're in a financial position to support us. Especially as we're doing our live stream quizzes at the moment, but financially we're all in a bit of a dire situation. Just speaking for myself, I'm currently living out of a hotel right now because my neighbours have had a leak. So until my insurance pays out, I'm currently absolutely fucked financially. So please support us on Ko-fi so we can continue to bring you cosplay content. Obviously we change the theme every week. And we want to do things like the X-Men Justice League, for which we don't have the costumes yet. So we really do need your support, guys, if you want to see the Sunday night quizzes continue and these cosplay story times continue. So please support us on Ko-fi if you can. ko-fi/Scottish Scooby Gang. There's also a subscribe feature on this account, on this live stream. You can subscribe to help us out. We could do like a subscriber chat or something like that, if there's enough folk who subscribe. But yeah, things are a bit rough at the moment, so we could really do with your help. But thank you. I'm glad you guys are enjoying Cosplay Storytime. But I'm going to call it quits tonight and head to bed because I'm working tomorrow. And we'll reconvene Cosplay Storytime and The Hobbit and join the dwarves in Mirkwood on Friday at 9 PM. Cool. Thank you very much, guys.